Paris, the city of light, the global capital of romance, fashion, and art. For centuries, it's been the dream destination for poets, painters, and travelers alike. Millions flock here every year to marvel at the Eiffel Tower, stroll along the Seine, and sip coffee on cafe terraces. On postcards and Instagram, Paris looks like the perfect city to live in. But the truth? Behind the beauty, Paris has become almost unlivable for ordinary people. It's now one of the most expensive cities in the world, with rising housing costs, skyrocketing rent, and daily expenses so extreme that the middle class is being forced out. Paris hasn't lost its charm, but it has lost its residents. Today, we're diving deep into why nobody lives in Paris anymore. The biggest reason locals are leaving Paris comes down to housing. The average price for real estate in Paris is now over 11,000 euros per square meter. That means a modest two-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood easily costs more than 1 million euros. In prestigious districts like the 6th arrondissement near Saint-Germain-des-Prés or the Golden Triangle around the Champs-Élysées, prices soar even higher, 20,000 euros to 25,000 euros per square meter. That translates to 2 to 3 million euros for an apartment that, in many other European cities, might cost a quarter of that price. For renters, it's no better. A basic one-bedroom apartment in central Paris averages 2,500 to 3,200 euros per month. Larger apartments or anything near iconic landmarks can easily exceed 4,000 to 5,000 euros monthly. Even small studios, once considered the option for students or young professionals, now push 1,200 to 1,500 euros monthly. Wage growth hasn't kept up. The average salary in Paris sits around 40,000 euros annually. Nowhere near enough to afford these housing prices. The math simply doesn't work, and locals are pushed into the suburbs, enduring long commutes on crowded trains just to work in the city they can no longer afford to live in. So, who is buying all this property? Increasingly, it's not Parisians. It's wealthy foreign investors, corporate elites, and millionaires treating Paris apartments like safe deposit boxes. Luxury real estate agencies in Paris report that more than 30% of high-end property buyers are international. From Middle Eastern oil wealth to Asian billionaires and American hedge fund managers, Paris has become a global playground for the rich. These buyers don't necessarily live in their apartments full-time. Many sit empty for most of the year, contributing nothing to the local community while driving prices higher. For families, the dream of raising kids in Paris has become a nightmare. Space is cramped, schools are overburdened, and affordable homes are nearly impossible to find. The result? Young families leave for outer suburbs or even different regions of France, hollowing out the city center. Housing is only the beginning. Even daily expenses in Paris push the city out of reach for ordinary people. Groceries in Paris cost 30% more than the national average. A simple basket of food that might cost 100 euros elsewhere in France can easily hit 130 to 150 euros in the capital. Dining out is punishing too. A mid-range dinner for two often costs 120 to 150 euros, and even casual cafes charge 6 to 8 euros for a coffee and croissant. Transportation isn't cheap either. While the metro provides affordable access, car ownership is practically impossible. Parking spaces in central Paris cost 300 to 400 euros monthly, and fuel prices are among the highest in Europe. Insurance and maintenance add thousands more per year. Then there's childcare. Parents in Paris face some of the steepest costs in Europe, with daycare fees often reaching 1,000 euros a month per child. Private schooling is even more brutal, with fees topping 15,000 euros annually at elite institutions. Add it all up, and simply existing in Paris feels like a luxury reserved for millionaires. Another factor driving residents out of Paris is overtourism. the city welcomes over 30 million tourists every year, more than 6 times its official population. On any given day, the streets are filled not with Parisians, but with visitors snapping photos of Notre Dame, queuing for the Eiffel Tower, or jamming into bakeries. While tourism brings money, it also inflates costs and distorts housing. Thousands of apartments once used for long-term rentals have been converted into short-term holiday homes through platforms like Airbnb. Studies estimate that more than 30,000 apartments in Paris are now used primarily for short-term rentals, removing them from the housing market and further squeezing supply. Locals feel like strangers in their own city. Neighborhoods once full of community life now feel like open-air museums catering to outsiders. For many Parisians, the city has become unlivable, not only financially, but culturally, as the daily rhythm of life is replaced by endless tourism. On top of everything else, Paris is notorious for its high taxes and heavy regulations. Property taxes and wealth taxes weigh heavily on homeowners, while small businesses struggle to survive under rising rents and strict labor laws. Many shops and cafés that once defined Parisian charm have closed, replaced by luxury boutiques and international chains that cater to wealthy visitors. The cost of running a business in Paris is simply too high for locals to sustain, contributing to the sense that the city is built for outsiders, not residents. So where are the Parisians going? Increasingly, they're moving to the suburbs or leaving the region altogether. Areas like Seine-Saint-Denis or Val-de-Marne absorb families priced out of central Paris, but at the cost of longer commutes and less access to the cultural life of the city. Others move to smaller French cities like Lyon, Bordeaux, or Nantes, where housing is far more affordable and quality of life often higher. Over the past 2 decades, Paris's population has stagnated, while many mid-sized French cities have grown. The result is a capital city that still shines globally, but feels increasingly hollow to those who once called it home. For those who can afford it, Paris remains magical. The city offers world-class museums, fine dining, and the glamour of the Champs-Élysées. Luxury brands like Chanel, Louis Vuitton, and Dior are headquartered here, feeding the cycle of wealth and exclusivity. But for average workers, Paris is now almost impossible. Teachers, nurses, and service workers often commute over an hour each way, because living inside the city has become financially impossible. The city of love has turned into a millionaire's playground. Paris hasn't always been this expensive. In fact, during much of the 20th century, it was known as a city of intellectuals, artists, and working-class families. Writers like Hemingway and Picasso thrived in Paris because rent was cheap and cafés were affordable. Neighborhoods like Montmartre, Belleville, and Le Marais were vibrant communities where creativity flourished precisely because living costs were manageable. But as globalization accelerated and Paris's global brand strengthened, property became a commodity. Starting in the 1990s, housing prices rose steadily, and by the 2000s, the surge became dramatic. In just 20 years, apartment prices doubled, then tripled, making Paris one of the most expensive markets in Europe. What was once a city for dreamers has become a city for investors. To understand just how extreme Paris has become, it helps to compare it with other capitals. London is also notoriously expensive, but wages there are higher and housing options more varied across boroughs. In Zurich, salaries match the cost of living, softening the blow. Paris, however, combines the worst of both worlds: high costs with relatively average wages. That gap is what makes living in Paris unsustainable for many. It explains why residents aren't just moving to suburbs, they're leaving entirely. French professionals are increasingly choosing cities like Lyon, Marseille, or Bordeaux, where their salaries go further, housing is affordable, and quality of life can be just as rich. The middle class once defined Paris. They were the teachers, bakers, cafe owners, and artisans who gave the city its texture and charm. Today, that middle class is disappearing. Official statistics show that Paris's population has been declining for years. Since 2010, the city has lost more than 120,000 residents. Many are families who simply cannot afford to stay. What's left behind are two extremes: the wealthy elite who can afford to buy and hold property, and lower-income residents living in small, subsidized flats under rent control. Everyone in between, the middle-class lifeblood of a vibrant city, is being squeezed out. This imbalance creates a hollowed-out Paris, a city that looks alive to tourists but feels increasingly empty to locals. Even for those who manage to stay, quality of life is strained. Apartments are tiny, averaging just 50 square meters compared to 80 or 90 in many other European capitals. Families often cram into small flats with no outdoor space. The stress of high rent and long commutes takes a toll, with surveys showing Parisians among the least satisfied urban residents in Western Europe when it comes to housing. Noise, pollution, and overcrowding add to the problem. With millions of tourists every year, locals often avoid entire districts like Montmartre or the Latin Quarter because they're overrun with visitors. Imagine living in a city so famous that you can't enjoy your own landmarks because they've been taken over by outsiders. So what does the future hold for Paris? Unless major reforms are made, the city may continue to lose residents while gaining more investors and tourists. The government has tried measures like rent caps and limits on Airbnb rentals, but demand far outpaces supply. As long as wealthy buyers view Paris as a safe, glamorous investment, prices will remain out of reach for most. Some experts warn that Paris could follow the path of Venice, a global icon slowly turning into a city without locals, functioning more like an open-air museum than a living community. Others believe the suburban belt will continue to grow, effectively turning central Paris into a wealthy enclave surrounded by commuter zones. One thing is certain: the dream of living in Paris, strolling to your local bakery, enjoying leisurely afternoons by the Seine, is slipping further away from reality for ordinary people. So, why does nobody live in Paris anymore? Because the very qualities that made it famous, beauty, culture, history, have turned it into one of the most expensive cities on the planet. Housing prices are sky high, daily life is crushingly expensive, and tourism has taken over entire neighborhoods. For the wealthy, Paris will always be paradise. For everyone else, it's increasingly a postcard, admired from afar, but impossible to inhabit. Paris hasn't lost its light, but it has lost its people, and that may be the city's greatest tragedy.